Well, we've had a raucous dinner party, a nice ride through the countryside, and a slog through the pouring rain. We've met non-existent characters and ridiculous rodents. We've escaped from ravenous trolls and had a totally irrelevant vocabulary session. And we found some gorgeous ancient weapons. After a brief rest, we've returned to learn more than is necessary about an evil fortress and learned enough about elves to get by. We've traveled through time to attend a meeting that couldn't possibly have happened the way it's described, got rained on again, and unknowingly sought shelter in a cave city full of nasty creatures. We've had a knockdown, drag-out battle and discovered a magic ring. Wow, quite the adventure so far. Oh, 3 little bits of housekeeping. 1, we're still using the theatrical versions. 2, I'm still using the book first methodology. And 3, from here on, the movies have very little to do with the book. Now, as always happens with Peter Jackson, we have 2 dissimilar reports of the same event, and we must try to correlate them. Bilbo finds himself on the east side of the Misty Mountains. He wandered a bit, but the thought kept occurring to him that maybe he ought to go back and see if the dwarves were still in the caves. After all, he had the ring and didn't need to worry about being spotted by the goblins. Now suddenly he heard voices, dwarf voices. Gandalf was leading a session of Where's Bilbo? And doing their best Han Solo impressions, the dwarves were all answering with some version of, It's not my fault.
Don't blame me!
But where did you last see him?
Now, movie Thorin is much nastier than book Thorin. While the movie version is blaming the whole thing on Bilbo, the book version isn't even in the conversation.
We will not be seeing our Hobbit again. He is long gone.
Quite pleased with himself, Bilbo popped out from behind a tree, startling them all. Bilbo explained his escape as merely being a good burglar, slipping silently through the shadows to avoid the goblin guards. Since there was no condemnation by Thorin, there was no soul-searching altruism on Bilbo's part. They were all exhausted and very hungry, but they knew they must move away from there as quickly as they could. They moved on, getting caught in a small landslide, but escaped harm either by climbing trees or hiding behind them. As they reached a clearing, they heard wolves howling, and the sounds were getting closer, but no orcs.
Out of the frying pan.
And into the fire.
Out of the frying pan into the fire was the title of the book chapter. Now, Tolkien uses the terms wolf and warg pretty much interchangeably. He explains warg was the name given to the evil wolves, quote, over the edge of the wild, unquote. Wild and evil, yes, but wolves, not some hideous monster. In the Lord of the Rings book, they had grown somewhat in size and evilness, but they were still wolves. Another Jacksonian battle of sorts that didn't actually happen. The wargs were gathering at the clearing to meet the goblins that the dwarves had just escaped from. There was a raid on some human settlers in the area planned for tonight. Wargs and goblins worked together on such matters. Realistically, the dwarves would not be able to outrun wolves, not even normal ones. They again escaped immediate danger by climbing the trees. Poor little Bilbo couldn't manage on his own, so Dory climbed down and hoisted him up to where he could grab a branch, just barely avoiding the jaws of a wolf. Again with the butterfly messenger. I'd really like to know what Jackson was smoking when he came up with this nonsense. If you're keeping score, that's one moth caught and given a message in Fellowship of the Ring. One moth unbidden, heralding the arrival of the eagles in The Return of the King. And this butterfly just picked out of a tree. Absolutely no Lepidoptera of any kind in any of the books. None. Zero. Zilch. Nada. And speaking of none, zero, zilch, nada, that also applies to Azog and his orcs.
Azog.
Another instance of a half-page description expanded into 7 minutes of violence that didn't really happen the way it was shown. Yes, burning pine cones were used as hand grenades. Far off, the Lord of the Eagles was perched on a pinnacle of rock on the eastern edge of the mountains, wondering what the heck was going on in the forest. Oh, by the way, the Lord of the Eagles did not have a name in The Hobbit, but I will call him Gwaihir anyway, because it's shorter. He heard wolves and saw the fires, so he called his posse and they set off for the site of the commotion. By now, it should come as no surprise that this battle didn't happen as such. There was no Azog, so he didn't thrash Thorin, who was not therefore rescued by Bilbo. Now, it's this kind of padding that turned what should have been a single 2-hour movie into an 8-hour extravaganza, plus another hour for the extended edition. Meanwhile, goblins, no, that's Tolkien's goblins, not Jackson's orcs, joined the wargs. They came up with the idea to push the fires under the trees where the dwarves were holding on for dear life. Now, there's just enough time for the goblins to sing another of Tolkien's little novelty songs, 15 birds in 5 fir trees.
15 birds in 5 fir trees, their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze.
The Gwaihir swoops down and plucks Gandalf from the tree. Gandalf quickly explained the situation, and the flock rushed back, attacked the goblins and wolves, and grabbed the dwarves. Bilbo was almost lost again, but managed to grab onto Dory's legs as he was lifted off. The rather uncomfortable flight took longer than Bilbo wished. It ended at the Eagle's Eyries, just as the Hobbit could not hold on any longer. Welcome back to the Digression Bar and Grill. Today's digression regards flying with eagles. The real-world golden eagle, which these birds most closely resemble, normally flies at an average of about 30 miles per hour. I assume these gigantic, semi-angelic beasts can do a lot better. For sake of argument, let's say about 50 miles per hour. Now, according to a common map of Middle-earth and internal clues, this rescue flight was roughly about 50 miles. That's not a coincidence. That's why I picked that speed. So it would have taken about an hour. The movie took about a minute and a half, but it felt like the full hour. Gotta pad this out as much as possible, you know, and show as much scenery as you can. Bilbo was not lying on the eagle's back as shown, but was dangling from Dory's legs, and the dwarf was grasped in the eagle's talons. Not only uncomfortable, but if not actually painful, but downright scary. Now, while we're paused, I have another issue to address. For the remainder of this series, you will see this caption quite often. Far too often, as far as I'm concerned. But let's get back to the story. Not too long after, just long enough to catch their breath, the eagles returned to carry the dwarves off, leaving Bilbo behind once again. Only a few minutes later, one came back for him. They all sat around on a large shelf of rock as Gandalf and Gwaihir reminisced about their previous meetings. The eagles provided food and the firewood for the dwarves to prepare a decent meal. The company got some rest and prepared to face the next leg of their adventure. As a point of interest, we have come to the end of the An Unexpected Journey movie, and just over a third of the book. Usually, coming attractions are shown before the movie, but this time, Mr. Jackson included one at the end. We have reached the end of Chapter 6, but there are 3 pages of Chapter 7 that are related. Our company awakes the next morning, has breakfast, and sets off one last time on the backs of the eagles. This time, Bilbo got a decent seat. They arrived at a great rock called the Carrack in the middle of the river, where the eagles finally bade them a courteous farewell. Gandalf gives Bilbo and the dwarves a very brief introduction to Beorn. But first, the Desolation of Smaug begins with 13 minutes of padding, including the obligatory directorial cameo. I suspect he popped up in the first film as well, but I haven't been able to find him. Anyone? The prancing pony scene is probably there just to remind viewers why we're here.
I should introduce myself. My name is Gandalf. Gandalf the Grey.
I know who you are. This is no chance meeting, is it, Gandalf?
No.
The Arkenstone lies half a world away, buried beneath the feet of a fire-breathing dragon.
Yes, it does. Which is why we're going to need a burglar.
We had orcs and more orcs and wargs. And something else. The scenery and the title. Now, to all those gushing over New Zealand scenery, I have one word. Colorado. Yeah, pick a U.S. city at random. Let's say, Detroit. A non-stop 3.5-hour flight from Detroit to Denver can be had for under $200 round trip. Detroit to Auckland takes 20 hours, including an hour-and-a-half layover in L.A., and costs around $1,700, plus $160 for the passport. Just saying. Book Gandalf dispenses a bit more information about Beorn.
His name is Beorn. And he's a skin changer.
Sometimes he's a huge black bear. Sometimes he's a great strong man. The bear is unpredictable, but the man can be reasoned with. However, he is not overfond of dwarves.
During this revelation, they have crossed onto Beorn's lands. I love this shot of Bombur overtaking everyone. It's hilarious. The house and yard are much the same in both book and movie.
What is that?
That is our host.
Anyway, the dwarves arrive at Beorn's house without being chased by anything. They did not spend a night in the barn before greeting their host.
You'll be safe here tonight. I hope.
Now, since Beorn didn't generally like dwarves, Gandalf came up with a sneaky trick to introduce them piecemeal while engrossing Beorn in the tale of their travels. Now, it's a master class in storytelling. You really should grab the book and read it for yourself. I think the scene is included in the extended edition, but reading is always better than watching an adaptation. The theatrical version just jarringly jumps from surreptitiously sleeping in the barn to graciously being served breakfast.
So you are the one they call Oakenshield.
The next section here at Beorn's house is typical of one of Peter Jackson's favorite methods of adaptation. Take the basic points and craft a new story around them. Here we have the equivalent of maybe a page that's the same, another 2 pages or so that are fairly similar, and 15 pages which are from somewhere out there Again, I'll do my best to align the two. In brief, Gandalf, with Bilbo by his side, encounters Beorn chopping wood. So far, so good. Gandalf begins to explain what they're doing in the neighborhood, gradually increasing the number of dwarves in the story, with 2 more of them coming around the corner of the house each time. Beorn gets engrossed in the story and gradually becomes amused at the dwarves. At any rate, the troop was invited to supper. They were waited on by Beorn's animal friends, dogs, ponies, sheep, that almost behaved like humans. The dwarves were probably grumbling since, again, there was no meat, but there was plenty of mead. They sat by the fire well into the evening, drinking and singing more of their dreary songs. Beorn left. Bilbo occasionally heard growling and scuffling outside throughout the night. He feared Beorn had changed into a bear and was coming back to kill them. At this stage of the story, Bilbo was still quite a wuss. Beorn did not appear the next day, and Gandalf had left as well. Gandalf returned just before sundown and wouldn't answer any questions until after supper. And even then, Gandalf stalled by blowing colored smoke rings about the hall. Remember, this was a children's story. He finally admitted to having been out picking out bear tracks. Apparently, quite a meeting took place there last night. There were big ones, little ones, and presumably some that were just right. And one set of gigantic ones that led to the Carrack, across the river, and back to the pine woods where the wargs attacked the dwarves. The next morning, Beorn was back, and in an unusually good mood. Those indeed were his tracks, and after viewing the site, he was finally convinced that Gandalf's tale was true. And because of that, he became a true friend, even though Bilbo was still suspicious.
I don't like dwarves, but orcs I hate more. What do you need?
He provided the troop with provisions enough for the beginning of their journey, as well as ponies they could ride as far as the forest. Then they had to send them back. He warned them of the dangers of Mirkwood, sent them on their way.
The darkness lies upon that forest. Fell things creep beneath those trees. There is an alliance between the orcs of Moria and the necromancer in Dol Guldur. I would not venture there, except in great need.
They rode on through the day, vaguely aware of being followed, at a distance, by a large bear.
This forest feels sick, as if a disease lies upon it.
Something moves in the shadows, unseen.
The High Fells. So be it.
You're not leaving us.
I would not do this unless I had you. You've changed, Bilbo Baggins. You're not the same Hobbit as the one who left the Shire.
Found something in the Goblin tunnels.
Found what?
My carriage.
Keep the map and keys safe. Do not enter that mountain without me. You must stay on the path. Do not leave it. If you do, you'll never find it again.
They spent one last night together on the edge of the forest. In the morning they said overlong goodbyes, and Gandalf rode off, repeating his last piece of advice. Don't leave the path. All right, we have come to within 8 pages of halfway through the book, but only a fifth of the way through the movies. That should give you a good idea of how much of the movies is not in the book. After this, the gulf widens. And if you don't believe me, check back in about 2 weeks, see for yourself.